I'm going to start with Paveer Velikonski this time, and this is page 551. The chapter's called The Last Decision. This is in part 3. That Shatov would denounce them, our people all believed. But that Peter Stepanovich was playing with them like pawns, they likewise believed. And what's more, they all knew that they would still come in complement to the spot the next day, and that Shatov's fate was sealed. They felt they had suddenly been caught like flies in the web of a huge spider. They were angry, but quaking with fear. Peter Stepanovich was unquestionably guilty before them. It all could have been handled with much greater accord and ease, if he had only cared to brighten the reality at least a little. Instead of presenting the fact in a decent light as something Roman and civic or the like, he had held up only crude fear and the threat to their own skins, which was simply impolite. Of course, there is the struggle for existence in everything, and there is no other principle. Everybody knows that. But still, I'm going to immediately go over to Andrew R. McAndrew and read those same 2 paragraphs. They were all convinced that Shatov was about to inform on them, and that Peter Verkovensky was using them as mere pawns. So they all knew that they would be at the appointed place the following night, and that Shatov was doomed. They felt like so many flies caught in the web of some huge spider. They were furious, but trembled with fear. Peter had obviously rubbed them the wrong way. Everything could have been worked out more smoothly and easily if he had tried to make the reality appear a little less sordid. Instead of presenting what they had to do as a noble duty and themselves as some group of ancient Romans struggling for freedom, he played directly on their animal fear, on the threat that was hanging over their own hides, which was, after all, a very ungracious thing to do. Of course, the struggle for existence comes into every aspect of life and, as everyone knows, is its only guiding force, and so on. Nevertheless, both of those end with period. The Paveer Velikonski and the McAndrew. Now I'm going to see if Magarshak is the same. All of them believed that Shatov was going to inform the police, but they also believed that Peter Verkovensky was playing with them like pawns. And yet they also knew that they would all be at the appointed place next day in spite of everything, and that Shatov's fate was sealed. They suddenly felt like flies caught in the web of a huge spider. They were furious, but they shook with fear. Peter had undoubtedly behaved unfairly to them. Everything could have been arranged far more harmoniously and easily if he had cared to make the facts look a little more pleasant, instead of presenting the facts in a more becoming light and putting them on the same footing as citizens of ancient Rome, or something of the sort. He merely appealed to their animal fears and emphasized the danger to their own skins, which was simply not nice. No doubt everything had to be considered from the point of view of the struggle for existence, and there was no other principle. They all knew that. But all the same, and this one ends with a hyphen. I'm going to continue with Magarshak. But Peter had no time to bring up the Romans. He was dumbfounded. Stavrogin's flight shocked and crushed him. He had lied when he said that Stavrogin had seen the vice-governor. The trouble was that he had gone off without seeing anyone, even his mother. And it really was strange that he had not even been questioned by the police. Afterwards, the authorities were called to account for it. Peter had spent a whole day making inquiries, but so far he had discovered nothing, and had never been so worried. And how could he be expected to give up Stavrogin all at once like that? That was why he could not be very tender with the members of the group of 5. Besides, they had forced him to act quickly. He had already decided to run after Stavrogin, but Shatov kept him back. He had to make absolutely sure of the loyalty of the group of 5, in case anything happened. Can't give it up. It may come in useful one day. So, I suppose, he must have argued. As for Shatov, he was absolutely convinced that he would inform the police. He had told them a lie about having actually seen Shatov's letter of denunciation to the police. He had never seen or heard of it. But he was as sure of it as that twice two makes four. It seemed to him that what had happened, the death of Liza, the death of Mary, was bound to influence Shatov, and that he would make up his mind now. Who knows? Perhaps he had a good reason for thinking like that. It is also known that he hated Shatov personally. They had had some quarrel, and Peter never forgave an insult. Indeed, I am convinced that that was his main reason. We have narrow brick pavements in our town, and in some streets they are made of wooden planks. Peter was striding along in the middle of the pavement, occupying it entirely and paying no attention to Laputin, who had no room to walk beside him and had either to run a step behind him or, if he wanted to speak to him, run off into the muddy road. Peter suddenly recalled that he, too, had had to splash through the mud the other day to keep pace with Stavrogin, who had walked, as he was doing now, in the middle of the pavement, occupying the whole of it. He remembered the whole scene and nearly choked with rage. But Laputin, too, was choking with resentment. Peter might treat the others as he liked, but how dare he treat him like that? Didn't he know more than all the rest? Wasn't he in closer touch with the affairs of the organization? More intimately connected with it and continuously active on its behalf, though perhaps only indirectly? Oh, he knew that even now Peter Verkovensky could ruin him if matters came to a head. But he had long hated Peter, and not because he was afraid of him, but because he had treated him with such utter contempt. Now that he had to make up his mind to do such a thing, he was more furious than all the rest put together. Alas, he knew that, like a slave, he would be the first next day at the appointed place, and that he would bring the rest with him. And if he could have killed Peter before tomorrow without in some way implicating himself, he would most certainly have killed him. Brooding over his sensations, he kept silent and hurried along after his tormentor. Peter seemed to have forgotten about him. Only from time to time he pushed him aside rudely and carelessly with his elbow. Suddenly, Peter stopped in one of our principal streets and went into a restaurant. "Where on earth are you going?" Laputin cried, boiling over with rage. "This is a restaurant. I want a beefsteak." "But, good Lord, this restaurant is always full of people." "What about it?" "But we shall be late. It's 10 o'clock. "We can't be too late there." "But I shall be late. They're expecting me back." "Let them. Only you'd be stupid to go back to them. With all this business of yours, I've had no dinner. And the later we go to Kirilov's, the surer we are to find him." Peter took a private room. Laputin sat down in an easy chair away from the table, looking angry and resentful, and watched him eating. Half an hour and more passed. Peter was in no hurry, ate with an appetite, rang for the waiter, asked for a different kind of mustard, then for beer, and still never uttered a word. He was absorbed in thought. He could do two things at once: eat with relish and ponder deeply. Laputin began to loathe him so much that he could not take his eyes off him. It was like an attack of madness. He counted every morsel of beefsteak Peter put into his mouth. He loathed him for the way he opened it, for the way he chewed, for the way he smacked his lips over the fatter morsels. He loathed the steak itself. At last, everything began to swim before his eyes. He felt a little giddy. Hot and cold flushes ran up and down his spine. Now I'm going to go to McAndrew, and I'm going to read that part of Peter eating the steak and Laputin watching him. I've always liked that one. And I like how in McAndrew here he says he dispatched the steak down his gullet. Here we go. Peter ordered his meal served in a private booth. Laputin, angry and resentful, sat in an armchair in a corner of the booth and watched him eat. More than half an hour later, Peter was still at it. He seemed to be in no hurry. Ate with great appetite, rang for the waiter and asked for a different kind of mustard, then rang again to order some beer. Not once did he say a word to Laputin. He seemed to be thinking very hard about something, and one seldom sees a man do two things at the same time so thoroughly, think so hard and eat with such zest. Laputin worked himself up to such a pitch of hatred that he couldn't take his eyes off Peter. It was something akin to a fit of hatred. He counted the bits of steak Peter dispatched down his gullet, loathing him for the way he opened his mouth, for the way he chewed, for the way he smacked his lips over the tastier morsels. His hatred extended even to the steak itself. Finally, everything began to disintegrate and merge before his eyes. His head began to spin, and waves, alternately burning and icy, ran up and down his spine. I don't know, I've always loved this part because of what it makes me think about Peter Verkovensky, his ability to sit with this person, and he knows by now how much all these people resent him, and to sit and eat while this guy's waiting, and this guy's in a hurry because he feels like he has responsibilities, and that Peter can just sit there and eat, and that he has an appetite at such a chaotic time, and where there's this murder looming, and this murder between so many people that's going to be a shared burden and a criminal burden by all these people, and he just sits, gets a steak, doesn't like the mustard, orders another mustard, gets some beer. Anyway, now I'm going to read from Pavel Volokonsky. Same paragraph. Peter Stepanovich took a private room. Laputin, irate and resentful, sat down in an armchair to one side and watched him eat. Half an hour passed, and more. Peter Stepanovich did not hurry, ate with relish, rang, demanded a different mustard, then beer, and said not a word all the while. He was deep in thought. It was possible for him to do both things at once, to eat with relish and to be deep in thought. Laputin finally hated him so much that he could not tear himself away from him. It was something like a nervous fit. He counted every piece of steak the man sent into his mouth, hated him for the way he opened it, for the way he chewed, for the way he sucked savoringly on the fatter pieces, hated the beefsteak itself. Finally, things became as if confused in his eyes. He began to feel slightly dizzy. Heat and chill ran alternately down his spine. I'll continue with the Pavel. You're not doing anything. Read this. Peter Stepanovich suddenly tossed him a piece of paper. Laputin went over to a candle. The paper was covered with small writing in a bad hand, with corrections on every line. By the time he managed to read it, Peter Stepanovich had already paid and was going out. On the sidewalk, Laputin handed the paper back to him. Keep it. I'll say later. Anyhow, what do you say? Laputin shuddered all over. In my opinion, such a tract is nothing but a ridiculous absurdity. The anger broke through. He felt as if he were being picked up and carried. If we decide to distribute such tracts, he was trembling all over, we will make ourselves despised for our stupidity and incomprehension of things, sir. I think otherwise. Peter Stepanovich strode along firmly. And I think otherwise. Can it be that you wrote it yourself? That's none of your business. I also think the shining light doggerel is the trashiest doggerel possible and could never have been written by Herzen. Lies, the poem is good. I'm also surprised, for instance, Laputin raced on, leaping and playing in spirit, that it is suggested we act so that everything fails. In Europe, It is natural to want everything to fail because there's a proletariat there. But here we're just dilettantes and, in my opinion, are simply raising dust, sir. I thought you were a Fourierist. That's not Fourier, not at all, sir. He's nonsense, I know. No, Fourier is not nonsense. Excuse me, but I simply cannot believe there could be an uprising in May. Laputin even unbuttoned his coat, he was so hot. Well, enough, and now before I forget, Peter Stepanovich switched with terrible coolness. You will have to typeset and print this leaflet with your own hands. We'll dig up Shatov's press, and you'll take charge of it tomorrow. In the shortest possible time, you will typeset and print as many copies as you can to be distributed throughout the winter. The means will be indicated. We need as many copies as possible because you'll have orders from other places. No, sir, excuse me, I cannot take upon myself such a... I refuse. And yet take it you will. I'm acting on instructions from the Central Committee, and you must obey. And I think that our centers abroad have forgotten Russian reality and broken all connections and are therefore simply raving. I even think that instead of many hundreds of fivesomes, there's only our one in all Russia, and there isn't any network. Laputin finally choked. The more contemptible for you that you ran after the cause without believing in it, and are running after me now, like a mean little cur. No, sir, I'm not running. We have every right to leave off and to form a new society. Moron! Peter Stepanovich suddenly thundered menacingly, flashing his eyes. The two stood facing each other for a time. Peter Stepanovich turned and confidently set off on his way again. It flashed like lightning through Laputin's mind. I'll turn and go back. If I don't turn now, I'll never go back. He thought thus for exactly 10 steps. But at the 11th, a new and desperate thought lit up in his mind. He did not turn and did not go back. They came to Filipov's house. But before reaching it, went down a lane, or better to say, an inconspicuous path by the fence, so that for some time they had to make their way along the sloping side of a ditch, where one had to hold onto the fence in order to keep one's footing. In the darkest corner of the tilting fence, Peter Stepanovich removed a board. An opening was formed, through which he promptly climbed. Laputin was surprised, but climbed through in his turn. Then the board was put back. This was that secret way by which Fedka used to get to Kirilov. Shatov mustn't know we're here, Peter Stepanovich whispered sternly to Laputin. Kirilov, as always at that hour, was sitting on his leather sofa having tea. He did not rise to meet them, but somehow heaved himself all up and looked with alarm at the entering people. You're not mistaken, said Peter Stepanovich. I've come for that very thing. Today? No, tomorrow, around this time. And he hastily sat down at the table, observing the alarmed Kirilov somewhat anxiously. He, however, had already calmed down and looked as usual. These people still won't believe it. You're not angry that I brought Laputin. Today I'm not, but tomorrow I want to be alone. But not before I come. And so, in my presence, I'd prefer not in your presence. You remember you promised to write out and sign everything I dictate. Makes no difference to me. Will you stay long now? I must see a certain person, and I have half an hour till then, so whether you want it or not, I'll stay for that half hour. Kirilov said nothing. Laputin, meanwhile, placed himself to one side, under the portrait of a bishop. The same desperate thought was taking hold of his mind more and more. Kirilov barely paid any attention to him. Laputin had known Kirilov's theory even before and had always laughed at him, but now he was silent and looked around gloomily. And I wouldn't mind having some tea, Peter Stepanovich stirred. I've just had a beefsteak and I was hoping to find your tea ready. Have some. You used to offer it yourself, Peter Stepanovich observed sourishly. Makes no difference. Laputin can have some too. No, sir, I can't. Can't or won't? Peter Stepanovich turned quickly. I won't do it here, sir, Laputin refused meaningly. Peter Stepanovich scowled. Smells of mysticism. Devil knows what sort of people you all are. No one answered him. They were silent for a full minute. But I know one thing, he suddenly added sharply, that no prejudice will stop any of us from doing his duty. Stavrogin left? Kirilov asked. Yes. He did well. Peter Stepanovich flashed his eyes, but kept hold of himself. I don't care what you think, so long as each one keeps his word. I will keep my word. However, I have always been sure that you would do your duty as an independent and progressive man. You are ridiculous. So be it. I'm very glad to make you laugh. I'm always glad to be able to oblige. You want very much that I shoot myself, and are afraid of suddenly not? I mean, you see, you yourself joined your plan with our actions. Counting on your plan, we've already undertaken something, so you simply cannot refuse, because you would let us down. No right at all. I understand this entirely as you will. And we are nothing, just as long as this entire will of yours gets carried out. And I'll have to take all your vileness on myself? Listen, Kirilov, you haven't turned coward. If you want to refuse, say so right now. I haven't turned coward. It's because you're asking too many questions. Will you leave soon? Another question? Kirilov looked him over with contempt. Here, you see, Peter Stepanovich went on, getting more and more angry, worried, unable to find the right tone. You want me to leave for solitude in order to concentrate? But these are all dangerous signs for you. For you, first of all. You want to think a lot. In my view, it's better not to think, but just to do it. You worry me, you really do. Only one thing is very bad for me, that at that moment, there will be such a viper as you around me. Well, that makes no difference. Maybe when the time comes, I'll go out, stand on the porch. If you're dying and show such a lack of indifference, that this is all very dangerous. I'll go out on the porch, and you can suppose that I understand nothing and am a man immeasurably lower than you. No, not immeasurably. You have abilities. But there's a lot you don't understand because you are a low man. Very glad, very glad. I've already said I'm glad to provide diversion at such a moment. You understand nothing. Anyway, I listen with respect. You can do nothing. Even now you cannot hide your petty spitefulness, though it's unprofitable to show it. You will make me angry and I will suddenly want half a year longer. Peter Stepanovich looked at his watch. I've never understood a thing about your theory. But I do know that you didn't make it up for us. And so you'll carry it out without us. I also know that it was not you who ate the idea, but the idea that ate you. And so you won't put it off. What? The idea ate me? Yes. Not me, the idea. That's good. You have some small intelligence, only you keep teasing, and I am proud. Wonderful, wonderful. That's precisely how it should be, that you should be proud. Enough, you've drunk. Now go. Devil take it, I guess I'll have to. Peter Stepanovich stood up. It's still early, though. Listen, Kirilov, will I find our man at Miss Chinika's? You know, or was she lying too? You won't, because he's here, not there. How? Here. Devil take it, where? He's sitting in the kitchen, eating and drinking. But how dared he? Peter Stepanovich flushed wrathfully. He was obliged to wait. Nonsense. He's got no passport or money. I don't know. He came to say goodbye. He's dressed and ready. He's leaving and won't come back. He said you're a scoundrel and he doesn't want to wait for your money. Ah, he's afraid I'll... Well, I might even now if he... Where is he? In the kitchen? Kirilov opened a side door into a tiny dark room. From this room, 3 steps led down to the kitchen, directly into the partitioned-off closet where the cook's bed usually stood. It was here, in the corner under the icons, that Fedka was now sitting at a bare wooden table. In front of him on the table were a small bottle, a plate with bread, and on an earthenware dish, a cold piece of beef with potatoes. He was having a leisurely snack and was already slightly tipsy, but had his sheepskin coat on and was apparently quite ready to set off. A samovar was beginning to boil behind the partition, but it wasn't for Fedka, though Fedka himself had made a point of lighting it and preparing it every night for a week or more. For Alexei Nilyich, sir, seeing as he's so very accustomed to having tea at night. I strongly suspect that the beef and potatoes had been roasted for Fedka that morning by Kirilov himself for lack of a cook. I'm going to go to McAndrew because it's just such a beautiful scene and go back to him looking into that side room and seeing Fedka. Kirilov opened a side door leading to a tiny dark room. From this room, 3 steps led down to a screened-off part of the kitchen where the cook's bed usually stood. It was there that Fedka was now sitting at a bare wooden table in the corner under the icons. There was a bottle of vodka before him, and a plate with some bread on it, and an earthenware dish containing a piece of cold beef and some potatoes. He was chewing lackadaisically and was obviously half drunk. He was dressed in a sheepskin jacket, as though ready to leave at any moment. Behind the screen, a samovar was beginning to boil, but it was not for Fedka, who, every night for over a week, had lit it for Kirilov. For Mr. Kirilov loves to have his tea at night, you know. And since there was no cook around now, Fedka's beef and potatoes had probably been prepared for him by Kirilov himself earlier in the day. "What's the idea?" Peter shouted, sweeping down the 3 steps. "Why didn't you wait for me where you were told?" He banged his fist on the table. Fedka straightened his back, looking at Peter with dignity. "Wait, sir, wait. Take it easy," Fedka said, enjoying the feeling of letting the words roll rakishly off his tongue. "First, you'd better remember you've the honor of being Mr. Kirilov's guest and that you're not even fit to polish his boots because he's a learned man. And you're nothing but..." And turning aside cockily, he pretended to spit. There was unmistakable scorn and determination in Fedka's manner, and it was obvious that his ominously calm way of talking might be swept away at any moment by an explosion of violence. But Peter had no time now to heed warning signs. And anyway, such a possibility didn't fit in with his conception of the way things should turn out. The events and failures of the day had completely befuddled him. Remaining at the top of the 3 steps, Laputin viewed the scene with great interest. "Do you or don't you want to have safe identity papers and a bundle of money that will take you where you were told to go?" "Well, you see, Mr. Peter, seeing as how you lied to me from the very beginning, the way I see it, you're a no-good crook. To me, you're some kind of a human louse. That's how much I respect you, mister. You promised me plenty of money to shed innocent blood, and then you swore it was to be done for Mr. Stavrogin, and now it turns out it was all your nasty plan and nothing else. Myself, I got nothing out of the deal, let alone 1,500, and Mr. Stavrogin, slapped you around for that scheming of yours. We know that too. And now here you come again, threatening me and promising me money. You never explain what the deal is, but I have a notion you're trying to talk me into going to Petersburg to get you even with Mr. Stavrogin because you're angry at him and you think he'll take advantage of my trusting nature again. And that'd make you the worst murderer yourself. And do you know what you deserve for having stopped believing in your black heart in the true God and Creator? You're nothing but a pagan. No better than a Tartar or idol worshiper. Mr. Kirilov's a real philosopher. And he must have explained to you lots of times about God and the true Creator and told you about the creation of the world and what's to become of us and how every beast, every creature from the book of Revelations changes. But you're dumb like a stupid idol. And you've gone on being deaf and dumb, and you've corrupted Lieutenant Urkel too, and made him like you, an evil, godless tempter. Ah, you drunken oaf! You rob churches and steal icons, and then you dare go around preaching about God? Let me tell you, Mr. Peter, it's true I robbed them icons, but what do you know? Perhaps just as I took out the pearls, a tear of mine could have turned into a pearl in the Lord's furnace because I'm just exactly like that orphan, who had no proper shelter to go to. You know from the books perhaps about that merchant who once upon a time, sighing and crying just like me, stole a pearl from the halo of the Blessed Virgin, and then later how he went down on his knees and put all the money he got out of it at her feet with a whole crowd watching him. And then the Holy Mother covered him with her mantle to protect him from all them people, so that at that time already they said it was a miracle, and the authorities made him write down the incident just the way it happened. But you let a mouse in, and that means you insulted the Lord. And if you wasn't my master by birth, who I carried in my arms when I was still a young lad myself, I'd kill you here and now. Peter was frantic with rage. Did you see Stavrogin today? Answer immediately. Don't you dare question me like that. Mr. Stavrogin was very surprised at what happened, and he had nothing to do with it at all. He never asked me to do it or offered me money. And what's more, I can tell you, he didn't want it. It's you